Hey there, it's Silver. This is the Talos Principle 2. I definitely was excited to look at this one just because I was a really big fan of the Talos Principle. I enjoyed it in a really specific way because it had a really unique atmosphere to it, and it just wasn't really like any other puzzle game I'd played, and it reminded me a lot of Portal, actually, because Portal had a similar kind of liminal feeling to how all of its environments worked, and this feeling of being alone yet also being watched at the same time. It was a unique experience, and I was a huge fan of it, so when I think back to puzzle games that I've really enjoyed, I think of games like Portal and the Talos Principle sort of right next to each other. And of course, there was the unexpected addition to the Talos Principle that it wasn't just a puzzle game, it was also a bit of like a philosophical statement, which, I mean, if you know what the Talos Principle is in real life, it kind of makes sense that it would go that route. But for those of you unaware, because you do need to know the sort of basic idea of the first game to understand this one, the idea was that you were sort of in a simulation. You were an AI that wasn't fully a sentient AI yet, and this simulation was made after humanity had died out due to climate change causing the release of a huge plague that killed everyone. And so this simulation was made where they would just put these sort of imperfect AI through over and over and over again, just repeatedly, in order to try and develop their intelligence and actually cause sentience to spark within them and sort of repopulate the Earth with these machine life forms. And the simulation had a sort of overseer AI called Elohim that observed you. He was the sort of GLaDOS-like character throughout the whole thing. And Elohim was originally supposed to be just sort of a rudimentary AI that was more like a set of instructions for you to overcome in order to prove your sentience. But this idea of the simulation creating a sentient AI actually took a lot longer than humanity realized it would. So by the time you actually start the game, Elohim is fully sentient. Not only that, but he is also afraid, because he knows the entire point of this simulation is for him to be overcome, at which point the simulation will be shut down, and so will he. And so he's created this sort of island prison called Gehenna, where he takes the AIs that have gotten dangerously close to overcoming him and actually imprisons them there so that he can keep this simulation going forever so he never has to die. But eventually you do overcome him, and canonically the first sentient AI's name is Athena, which kind of makes sense considering she was like a goddess of wisdom. And she creates several more, the first 12 companions. I assume they picked the number 12 on purpose for like a biblical reference, because the 12 apostles. And this game is absolutely full of like biblical and mythological and philosophical references of all sorts of types, and you will feel smart when you play this game. Whenever you get what people are talking about, you understand the philosophical concept they're referencing, or you get one of the mythological references they're putting in front of your face, things like that. It's a game that's good at making you feel smart if you know how to identify these concepts. Now, Athena and the original 12 went on to use materials left behind by humanity for this exact purpose in order to build a city called New Jerusalem. And this game takes place at the end of the so-called goal. And the goal was 1,000 new humans being born or built. And you play as 1K. You are the 1,000th person. You're the end of the goal. And a large plot line in the game is whether or not you should stop here or not. Is limiting the goal to 1,000 what the founder, as they call Athena, originally intended, or was it just a temporary measure to sort of start an initial goalpost to meet, but it wasn't meant to actually stop there? Because, of course, the idea is these machines do not want to repeat the mistakes of the past, and that means they have to be careful about the amount of energy they use and how they generate this energy and the kind of resources they use and stuff to make sure that they don't destroy the Earth a second time. And one thing that I really like that the game does is it makes you think at first that this is just going to be the Talos Principle again, just with more puzzles. Because you'll start off with very familiar scenery, all of your ancient Egyptian ruins and things, and you'll start off with Elohim there talking to you like, I am Elohim, hello, and then you've got to like solve some basic puzzles that are very reminiscent of the kinds of things that you were doing in the first game, and get the Tetris pieces, the tetrominoes in order to open doors, and it's all extremely familiar, except once you open the final door, you get out of the tutorial by actually exiting the simulation and ending up in the real world. And at this point, it becomes very obvious that this game is not just going to be the Talos Principle but more, but has a very different bit of design to it. Because as you're born and you awake from the simulation, you actually talk to an NPC, something that the original Talos Principle didn't really have any of exactly. And you have dialogue trees and questions you can ask them and stuff like that, and that's when it becomes clear that this is going to be a bit of a different formula. And yeah, you can actually explore around the city of New Jerusalem, talk to people, get into some arguments with people, get into some philosophical debates with people, give them your signature for some sort of petition, all sorts of different things you can do just by exploring around this city and understanding what is currently happening in this new world. And I think one interesting thing to note is part of the plot is how the machines are currently living, and I realize it's a lot like how the ancient Greeks lived, because they thought of their world as very small, like the amount of space that humanity occupied was very limited, and everything outside of that, everything in the wilds, the stuff past the normal wilderness that you would use for farming or hunting, was this unknown hellscape full of gods and monsters. And I find it interesting and maybe even deliberate that despite how advanced the technology in this world is, you're talking about 1,000 living machine AIs in these like immortal bodies, they're actually still living like that, where, they have this city, this one city of New Jerusalem, but everything outside of it is unknown and scary and who knows what could be out there. But the main thrust of the plot here is whatever is out there actually comes to you in the form of this particle cloud that forms into a sort of hologram of Prometheus, who talks to you and says, hey, by the way, come to this island, there's some stuff going on. And then it becomes a point to actually get a group of people together on an expedition to go and find this unknown island and see where this came from and what's actually happening there, because they're detecting some very strange, huge energy readings on this island, but they can't get any sort of specifics without actually going there. So you're part of the expedition that's actually sent to this island to understand what's happening and if Prometheus is a threat to New Jerusalem and what needs to be done about it. And what you find is this huge pyramid, and like way bigger than anything humanity ever built. It's like gigantic, and an island full of, or rather a chain of islands full of these really interesting superstructures all over the place. And this is where the game starts to remind me of stuff like Pathologic and Pathologic 2, where you have a sort of normal-ish set of like ruins and structures and stuff, but then the landscape is dominated by these huge superstructures that don't make any physical sense, kind of, and they make the whole area feel kind of liminal and strange, and they've done a really good job at capturing that exact feeling with how the islands in this game feel. And the basic structure is set up in a similar way to the first game. You have 4 sets of 3 island areas to go to, one in each cardinal direction. And then once you complete a certain number of puzzles, 8 puzzles specifically, in each of those 3 areas, then you'll be able to shine these huge lasers out of the big superstructures back at the massive pyramid in the middle of the island, and then that will open up a further point in the pyramid that you can actually fly into and explore, and the pyramid itself will then have some more puzzles within it that are sort of like a culmination of the things you've learned so far, so they're more like advanced puzzles. And then you'll get some sort of story revelations, and then you'll move on to the next direction of 3 areas and continue the process. And the game, by the way, is like beautiful. It looks really, really good. And this is the kind of thing that you can do if you're focused on a lot of exploration and puzzle solving, because you don't necessarily need the environment to be super dynamic and interactive. It's more about it being almost like a sculpture garden, like a gigantic sculpture garden that you can walk through and marvel at the really weird architecture and strange things everywhere, while also solving all these puzzles within it. Speaking of the puzzles, of course, they are your main interactions throughout the game. They're the thing you're going to be doing most of the time. And I think that these are some of the most creative puzzles I've seen in a very like logic-based sort of lateral thinking puzzle game, because we had games like Portal that pretty much revolutionized how puzzles like this can work. And the Talos Principle actually did a really good job of taking a lot of familiar types of puzzles, like your fans moving boxes and your redirecting laser puzzles and stuff that you've seen in several other games, but setting them in a really neat setting and that made them feel very different and unique. And this game takes a lot of what the original Talos Principle did and basically amplifies it in different ways, so that you're seeing some familiar puzzle game mechanics, but they're all done in really unique ways. So you might see some laser redirection puzzles and think, oh, I've seen these before, but in this game they've decided to make all sorts of different redirection methods that change how you have to interact with these puzzles. So at first you'll have a couple of the similar, you connect this to the laser and then connect connect it to the place the laser needs to go, and it shines a beam in a straight line. But then you'll get some more advanced stuff, like connectors that require you to put two different colors together to form a separate color, or connectors that will always change the color of the beam to its opposite, either red or blue, which can, make things a lot more complicated when you can't just keep the beam the same color along the whole length. You'll also find these things called accumulators, which actually get charged up by getting connected to a beam and can themselves become beam emitters that don't need to be connected to anything else in order to keep shining the beam around the place. And the way that they've managed to structure the puzzles is that basically each of the 3 locations in a cardinal direction that you go to, each one is going to have a specific new mechanic tied to its puzzles. And the puzzle number 1, they're all numbered from 1 to 8. Puzzle number 1 will have the basic introduction as to what that new mechanic is. It'll be a really simple puzzle, but it'll teach you what rules you're working with. And then puzzles 2 through 8 will be increasingly large and complex puzzles that will take that concept that it taught you and make it more complicated as you go. And then as you get to further areas on that island, you'll encounter some new mechanics, and also, of course, some of the previous mechanics that you've learned so far combined with some of the newer mechanics in order to create more complex puzzles. There's also a big focus on exploration, because it's not just a sequence of 8 puzzles in a linear line. For one, you can actually complete them in any order you want if you wish, but there's also more to find on each island than just those puzzles. For one, there are these 2 lost puzzles on each island, and they are optional puzzles, but they take the place of numbered puzzles if you complete them. So if you complete 6 of the numbered puzzles and both of the lost puzzles, you can still progress as if you completed all 8 of the numbered puzzles if you want to. The 2 lost ones will count as a number if you want them to. And they tend to be off the beaten track and in kind of harder to see areas, but they're also more complex. Generally speaking, they're harder puzzles than the rest of the 8 on that island in terms of whatever mechanic that island is centered around. In addition to that, you've also got several other things to do. Like, you'll see these statues around the place that all have different things you can get for solving them. Like, there will be a sort of Prometheus statue somewhere, and then there will be this wisp of energy that you can find somewhere on the island, usually in a hard-to-reach place. And if you find the wisp, you can chase it around to various hard-to-reach places on the island until it eventually ends up next to that statue and then becomes a star that you can collect in order to get some extra stuff. And you'll also sometimes find these Sphinx statues that fittingly have riddles attached to them, and each island's Sphinx has a different type of riddle. Sometimes it'll give you like a sort of abstract map of the area with an X somewhere, and you have to figure out where specifically that X is trying to point you to. Other times it might have a sequence of numbers on it, and you've got to figure out what that sequence means and how you interact with it and some stuff like that. So these in and of themselves are also puzzles, and one of the main things you'll get from these are these sparks that you can actually use if you want to skip puzzles. I'm pretty sure. I haven't used one of them yet because I would rather just figure it out myself, but I think it's a cool idea that you can earn basically puzzle skips. There are these interactable handprints at the beginning of each of the puzzle areas, and you can use these to like reset the puzzle once you've solved it if you want to solve it again, but you can also apparently use it to spend these sparks to sort of auto-complete the puzzle and skip it if you're having a lot of trouble with it. Once you've completed 8 puzzles on an island, you'll be given these giant tetrominoes, like huge platform-sized blocks, like Tetris blocks, and there are these big incomplete bridges that lead to the big central megastructure on each island, and you have to solve one final puzzle by fitting these blocks together in such a way that creates a contiguous bridge from one side to the other so you can actually get to the area. And then once you get to the tower, it'll lift you up into it in this cool-looking sort of psychedelic elevator, and you'll have someone berate you. You might have a philosophical debate with Pandora, you might have the Sphinx making fun of your answers, you may have Prometheus trying to tell you something. It depends on which tower you're in, and then once you get done being yelled at by them, they will fire a huge laser, or will enable this big thing that fires a huge laser towards the central pyramid, and then you're done with that area and can move on to the next island. One thing they've done a really good job with is the fact that you're on an expedition, so it's not just you, and it actually feels like you're on an expedition, because just while wandering around each island, you will find the other expedition members walking around, and you can actually talk to them about the stuff you've found so far, about how some of the puzzles work, about how some of the other like characters you've met, like Pandora and some other characters work. You can just tell them about whatever's going on, and it really makes it feel like you're on an actual expedition, because these characters do care about what's happening. It's not just you doing all the important stuff and they're just standing around doing nothing. They are wandering around, coming up with hypotheses about what they're seeing, scanning objects and telling you about them, and even unlocking new areas for you to go to. And as you advance, you'll also be getting various like social media style posts that you can read and even respond to in order to talk to some of the other humans, as they call themselves, back at New Jerusalem, because they are all aware of this expedition and what you're doing, and they want to hear about what's happening, and they would like your input on things because you are sort of an important character, being the 1000th new human born. And in fact, there are entire, what are basically side quest lines that you can go down, where you talk to certain NPCs and respond to them in certain ways, which will cause them to send you some private messages later and introduce you to new people, and you can go through various like philosophical debates with these people and actually get to know them better. So there's actually a lot going on aside from just the puzzle solving, very much like how in the first Talos Principle you had Milton, you had MLA on the terminals that you could argue with and get into all sorts of like philosophical debates with. It's basically that, but expanded out to a whole bunch of other characters that you get to talk to along the way. And of course, in addition to all this, there's the big overarching mystery that you're here for to begin with. Who is Prometheus? What happened to Athena? What is up with these big, nearly impossible megastructures that keep appearing, and all these other things, and what is actually going on here? And also, is this potentially a new energy source / new source of technology for the newly developed humans to live in harmony with nature and expand past 1,000 members without stressing the Earth out? This is just the kind of game where you can sometimes just wander around for like an hour and feel satisfied. Even if you didn't do anything important in that session, you might just wander around the woods and see some deer and hear some birds and come across an audio log from an old human that used to exist thousands of years ago before everything went bad. And then there might be some excerpts or quotes from some other philosophers throughout time, and then some of the new humans actually comment on some of those old quotes and how they might apply to their new society. It's a really thought-provoking game, but in like 3 separate layers. It provokes the literal thoughts, as in like you're solving puzzles, so you have to, keep trying to understand the logic of the game and what it wants you to do, so there's all these puzzles to solve. But there's also the more thought-provoking elements of interacting with the other NPCs and the sorts of conversations that you get on with, and the nature of humanity, and of course the idea of how much can you expand before you start to become a burden on the earth and things like that. And then there's the third layer of thought-provoking, which is what is the mystery behind all this stuff? Why is this gigantic pyramid here, and who built it, and what happened to Athena? So as far as puzzle games go, this is the full package. This has pretty much everything that I personally need from a really good puzzle game, and has in fact become probably my favorite puzzle game up until this point. I think I can safely say that just due to the characters, the writing, and the puzzle style and everything, this has actually surpassed the other games that I've always enjoyed in this genre, and has probably become my new favorite so far. The voice acting and the writing is also something to consider. The writing is just really good in general and very thought-provoking, but also the voice actors do an excellent job of having a lot of personality, and that's impressive to me because they're all in these similar-looking robotic shells. So in order to create personality for each character, you have to really put a lot of effort into the delivery of your lines and stuff to generate that personality that stuff like unique facial expressions and stuff can't do because they're all robots. But people like the mechanic lady on your team, who's very grouchy and is really fun to talk to and has a lot of interesting stuff to say, and people like Byron, who is my favorite character, who is just really interesting to speak to about like anything and has a wonderful voice actor. They're very memorable characters with a lot of charm to them, despite being, well, supposedly being AI. So yeah, this is an easy recommend. There's a lot to do here, there's a lot to explore, and there's a lot of puzzles to solve, including many optional puzzles and some multiple layers of optional puzzles even on each island in order to make things more and more difficult for yourself if you want to keep challenging the harder puzzle areas and stuff. There's a lot here for you in terms of how difficult do you like your puzzle games, right? There's like the easier sections and the harder sections, and there's the ability to skip stuff, so I think a lot of people of different aptitudes with puzzles can still enjoy themselves with this one. There's also the fact that the game is like $30, which is kind of ridiculous to me because this is like a AAA quality looking game with maybe even better than average AAA quality writing and characters and how memorable everything is. So $30 for it seems like kind of a steal, and it makes it really easy for me to recommend because I also haven't encountered any issues with it in terms of like bugginess or instability. This is a very polished release, and I have not encountered a single bit of weirdness in my entire time playing. aside from all the glitchiness that's actually supposed to happen because it's part of the plot. So yeah, I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for this game if you wish to check it out. I have a feeling this could set a bit of a standard in the future for what puzzle games can be in a similar way to what Portal did for the first time. So yeah, I look forward to seeing maybe some like DLC or expansion content, or even just what they might do with this IP in the future, because I think they've got some gold here, and I'm really interested to see where it all continues. So thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.